difficulties.
Moscow looked like I imagined it would. The Kremlin area was absolutely beautiful, just like on TV. But outside of that, it was as if Moscow was built, I don't know, in black and white. Every building looked similar, a bit cold, but always functional. We were sitting in Dmitry's office, and it was like a scene from an Austin Powers movie. Dmitry sitting on a couch with espresso set up on the table, and no lie, his frickin' pet cat on his lap. Crazy. And me at the table, a U.S. businessman sent by my board to investigate building a manufacturing company in Russia. So how big is the market? I asked. How big do you need it to be? Dmitry replied. I was not in Kansas anymore. Hi, I'm Phil Kerper, Managing Director of Ringling Business Solutions. In this episode of the CEO's Field Manual, we'll cover an amazing journey to assess investing in a foreign country. The lessons are impactful and the journey is remarkable. So let's jump right in. Now, we had substantial holdings in China. They were lasting and highly successful. We also sold product into Russia through our independent manufacturer's representative. This is a common model for U.S. suppliers, and you might have heard me talk about it before. The rep develops the market, takes title of the equipment, and manages all the importing and local requirements. Victor and Ivan were the principal of our manufacturer's rep. They also were my hosts and guides for the visit. The equipment was HVAC heating systems, and the application that got our attention was applying the equipment for central heating in high-rise apartment buildings. We had now sold into this market several times using that rep model. Given our long-term successes in China, it was an obvious question for the board of directors to ask. Why not duplicate that model in Russia? To do so would require setting up a Russian-based company, building out manufacturing plant there, and setting up direct sales and marketing functions on the ground. Victor and Ivan were fully on board with the idea, as they would be the managers of the enterprise. So I was assigned to visit Russia and come back with an assessment and recommendations. The trip included several site visits where we had installed our systems in apartment buildings. It included touring several existing manufacturing sites where we could set up the company, visit with local officials, including a mayor or their equivalent, and others who would have to be supportive of a U.S. firm setting up shop there, and the meeting with Dmitry, who was touted as having a countrywide handle on the market. I arrived in Moscow and was met at the airport by Victor and Ivan. Victor was the sales business guy, and Ivan the technical expert. Right away in the car, it got interesting. Ivan started asking detailed technical questions about the design of the equipment. Now, this was a unique design, and most folks did not really understand the details of how it worked. 99% of the time, the reps just wanted to know enough to sell it, install it, service it, and take care of their customers. Ivan was asking very detailed physics questions. I later learned that both Victor and Ivan were actually scientists. Before perestroika, they worked as physicists in the government. They both basically were tossed out on the street following perestroika and decided to become manufacturer's rep. Ivan was literally a rocket scientist. I never used the term, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to sell these, quite the same again. The first day was low-key, allowing me to deal with jet lag and finalize the plans for the week. I'll never forget what they said as they dropped me off at the hotel, though. You're not going to leave your hotel, right, Phil? Victor asked. Not even step outside the front door to have a cigarette, right? Ivan added. I didn't smoke, by the way. Turns out I was a classic kidnapping target. Again, definitely not Kansas. My board and I had discussed this and had the appropriate reserves and insurance to pay a ransom if, God forbid, that would ever be needed. And I've traveled abroad often at this point, so the issue, it wasn't settling, but not new to me. It was not a topic I really wanted to cover with my wife before the trip, though. I broached it sparingly, telling her, it's not a common thing, I'll be very careful. Well, it was a thing. Sorry, dear. The visits to local officials were encouraging. They were very welcoming of foreign investment. They knew the permitting processes and said they would be supportive. When assessing an investment in another country, support from those local officials is critical. They can make or break you quickly. I was also trying to gauge the potential for payouts and corruption with these officials. Nothing in this area came up during the conversations. But I had to say, all the conversations were in Russian with Victor translating. They could have hit this topic without me knowing it. In the following days, we visited several potential manufacturing sites. I had quickly gravitated to leasing an existing facility rather than building one, although we were discussing both options with officials we met. One site in particular was amazing. It was a huge plant used in World War II to build tanks and other military equipment. End to end, it must have been, a mile long with 200-foot ceilings. It was just massive. The plant was subdivided so individual manufacturing companies could lease as much space as they needed. It was a decent option and very affordable. At that point, though, I preferred a site that was smaller and a bit more aligned with what we needed. The product was industrial, about the size of a compact car. So we did not need a huge facility if we moved forward. Each night, I'd work in my hotel room to arrange my thoughts and draft my report back to the board. I had very positive reviews of Victor and Ivan. I had met them before on a trip to the U.S., but this trip further confirms they were hardworking, smart to be sure, and as loyal as you can get in another country. They were very keen on the idea, but were asking to be employees. That was a bit of a complication, likely unworkable for us, but it was not a deal breaker for them if it did not materialize. But good local management? Check. Local support from the officials? Looks fine. Manufacturing options and affordability? Workable. The next day, we visited several banks. We had figured this and market penetration would be the hardest issues we'd face. We were right on the banking. Both bankers I met with were highly cautious, if not suspecting, while meeting us. Now, there are some sticky issues in moving money out of a country like Russia. The bankers were going to be a hard partner for sure. Victor and Ivan tried to mitigate the topic by offering their support as Russians to help manage the banking. But I'd learned hard lessons on this topic before. We had to have control of the money and the financial relationships. That gets us back to the last day of the visit and our meeting with Dmitry. The building was a large office building, and as it turned out, a government office. We are in the ornate reception area outside Dmitry's office waiting for the meeting. I hadn't even met the cat yet, and I was already taken by the ornate offices in such a plain office facility. The door of Dmitry's office opened, and we entered, got acquainted, and began the conversation. The tone was serious and a bit more cautious than other meetings besides the bankers. There also was a ton of conversation in Russian that was not being translated, or better put, was just being summarized into English. We hit on the product, the manufacturing options, Victor and Ivan's roles, and then came to the elephant in the room question. I asked my question on market size and sales projections and got the return question. Then the follow-up. Dmitry says, I will guarantee sales that meet your targets. I do want a stake in the venture, of course, though. I kept my expression neutral. This trip, I'm here for assessment. In the future, we can go into more detail on the arrangements. I'm actually thinking in the back of my mind, not a chance, and this guy is going to demand a big cut out of the margins. We parted, and we're back in the car. I asked Victor to tell me more about what Dmitry did and how he could guarantee sales in this way. What I heard was alarming. Dmitry had several jobs. In his quasi-government role, he helped manage the use of oil reserve funds to support construction and infrastructure projects. He also apparently had several private businesses on the side where he was on the other end of that funding. Victor advised Dmitry could guarantee the market by simply designating the funding to renovate as many apartments for construction as we needed. Well, that would be great, I thought. Then we all go to jail. I'm flying back home, completing my report to the board. I was not going to be telling them what they wanted to hear for sure. We could probably solve for the banking, but it may require leaving even more margins behind. And we certainly could not use someone like Dmitry without abandoning all sense of business ethics. And we'd likely not be very successful without someone like him. My recommendation, and I'll use the appropriate word here, niet. Back home, the board meeting was tense, and I was definitely on the spot. The board members were more focused on the opportunity than the risks. They had also navigated hard challenges in China over the years. Why was this different? They challenged me to provide viable options, not just a negative report. And I said, look, we can probably find a way to solve the banking issues while maintaining control, but we will likely burn even more margin to get the cash out. But the market issue is still major. Are we willing to be patient? I don't know, for many years while we penetrate this market. Further, if we do not engage someone like Dmitry, will they work against us to block us? Dealing with someone like Dmitry was a non-starter for everybody. My final comment was, we are assessing many other countries at this point to build out for manufacturing. In my view, this one does not look like our best option. In the end, the board agreed. We did not proceed and continued to sell a reasonable amount of equipment through Victor and Ivan as our reps. Some takeaways. First, if you're going to do business in a foreign country, buckle up. This is not for the faint of heart. You'll be tested, the local players will likely have conflicting interests, and the rules may be complex or even, as in this case, unacceptable. It kind of reminds me of the Back to School movie with Rodney Dangerfield. To win in business, and specifically international business, requires much more than what they taught us in business school. Second, send your key executive in country for personal assessments. There's no substitute for your lead executive, me in this case, to personally investigate and experience the local situation. The stakeholders all have differing interests. Your assessing executive will only have the company's best interest at heart. Finally, your job as an executive is to bring forward the hard facts, even if they are not what your stakeholders want to hear. Hit the downsides as clearly as the upsides. It'll bring some pushbacks or even conflicts, but that is why you are engaged as a senior executive and CEO. Anyone can say, this looks great. A true pro also highlights the minefields so they can be understood and addressed, even if it creates professional risk for you. Thanks for watching this episode of the CEO's Field Manual. Tune into the next episode with the topic, It's a Mistake to Dress Down a Manager in Public, except it works every time. See you then. Thanks, everybody. Please subscribe, and we'll see you at a future video.